We all believed in the escape-proof myth, and this turned out to be one of the most sophisticated escape attempts in U.S. history.
Earlier, on the morning of June the 12th, 1962, Officer Bill Long had been in charge of the first count of the day.
And at the sound of the bell, the inmates are supposed to be dressed and up, standing in front of their doors for count. Bill, there's a guy up here, I can't get up. Well, it's the sergeant says, I'll get him up.
I'll wake him up. Hey.
And he was laying in there, so I reached in through the bars and I hit the pillow. And Lord knows what happened. The head fell off on the floor. The guy said that I shot back about 6 feet. There's his face, there's his head, hair on his head and everything. One of the other officers there said, here's another one, Bill, right here. There's one up here, Bill. And I said, don't touch him, don't touch it. A horror movie. And I was right in the middle of it.
These two were brothers and they used spoons, like horror, I forget what they said, but they made a hole in the back of the cell and they climbed through.
Frank Lee Morris and two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, had escaped the night before. They made dummy heads to fool the officers. Morris was the brains. The Anglin brothers, they were just swamp rats out of Florida. According to the reports, the men enlarged the vent openings in the back of their cells with stolen spoons.
I'll give you a ton of spoons, and I want to see how long it'll take you to go through one of them walls there. Them walls may be old, but let me tell you, you're not going through them cells with them spoons.
And in fact, 13 spoon handles and a ladle handle were actually found hidden in 2 cans of cement paint after the escape was over.
Inside is the utility corridor. The 3 men climbed up these pipes to the roof.
At approximately 10:30 that night, there was a sound like a hubcap when you're dropping it, goes, but very loud.
They worked for over a year to get up onto that roof, and that would have been the most fantastic moment to have stood there knowing that you actually got out of the most secure building in the country.
The question has never been answered. Did they make it to freedom?
My theory is that they drowned.
They went to South America, because I know they were all studying Spanish.
The men have never been found. Imagine it is nighttime and the cell house is dark.
Lights went out around 9:30 at night, and that was it.
It was dead quiet, quiet like a mausoleum.
It was kind of scary walking around those dark tiers, and some would sleep with their eyes open, some grind their teeth, some talk in their sleep.
You lay awake a long time.
3 times a day, all the men in general population gathered here for 20-minute meals. Imagine 200 plus men, each armed with a knife, fork, and spoon. This was potentially the most dangerous room in the cell house.
And if you notice up on the ceiling there, you see these canisters up there dotted around. That's tear gas.
End of 3 decades, over 1,500 men had served time on the rock. By then, Alcatraz had served its own time. After years of harsh wind and weather, the buildings were badly deteriorated. The isolated island was too expensive to run. And now in the 1960s, prison reformers preached rehabilitation instead of punishment. Early in 1963, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy ordered Alcatraz closed. They were the last prisoners to leave the rock on March 21st, 1963.
So here's actual trays and spoons and stuff from when they were in the dining hall. So right now we're going to hear the story of the escapee artist who actually made it to land.
John knew he couldn't go east. Family housing down the road. Too many people to see him. What's the next easiest way to water? That direction, north. Go over those fences under the water tower. John knew he couldn't go north. There's a guard in the guard tower, an armed guard, 24 hours a day on the north end of the island. He can't go north, he can't go east. The building's blocking his path. Maybe this is why the guards weren't so concerned about the supply room. What's the worst that can happen if a guy gets outside? John made it to the bay. How can you get from here to San Francisco Bay? I'm going to get your ideas. We'll tell you what John did next at our next stop about 100 yards down the road. Did he hide that window for a year, and how could he do it? What a big security problem that would be, right? He kept that pile of boxes piled high for nearly a year, but he covered his tracks every day. What he did was he filled in the partially cut bar full of soap and then painted it to match. He had boxes of bars of soap and paint in the supply room. So in case the guards looked, they hopefully wouldn't see it visually. Officers would often check the integrity of the steel bars using a flat piece of metal like a scraper or the back of a knife blade. They would certainly have discovered his bars had he done that. But again, the bars he was cutting was about 10 feet in the air, the curved bars at the top, another part of his gamble. It appears that the guards during their searches never found those bars in the process of being cut. That's a good question. We left John back up there, right? This is the easiest way to the dock. That's why we're taking it, but we're free people, right? We can be here. He could not, but he's going to get to the bay. How are you going to get from there to San Francisco Bay? What's your idea? Sorry? Over. That's it. I mean, the building's your problem. Did you notice the drain pipes coming off the roof of the building? Came just to the left of the main prison entrance. You walked right by it, could have reached out and touched it. John saw those pipes the day he arrived. He would later say he always thought of those as a ladder. When he left the kitchen, he stole some supplies. He wasn't coming out empty-handed. Amongst the supplies he stole, he had 2 long electric cords. He had no chance to get rope, but they had some machines that required long electrical cords. That's a primitive rope. He also had a pair of leather work gloves for his job. With the help of those tools and some others, he climbed up that pipe to the roof of the building. He tiptoed across the cell house, right above the prison library. You're there on your audio tour. Tied his electric cord rope to a pipe and he rappelled down the west face of this building. No one sees him. Now he's on the other side of the cell house facing west towards the Golden Gate. He's got a few barbed wire fences to climb. He cuts himself up, but he's motivated. He keeps climbing. Then he's got that cliff. If you were on the night tour boats, you saw that cliff. It's about a 50-foot drop. John scales to the base of the cliff and he does it. There's John. He's standing ankle deep in water in the tide pools, facing west towards the Golden Gate Bridge when he hears the escape alarm go off. Took too long. Dinner's only 20 minutes. 20 past 4, dinner's over. The guards go into the kitchen to count the crew. Someone's missing. They search. They see the opening in the window bars. Everyone on the island heard that alarm. People in San Francisco could hear the Alcatraz escape alarm. John heard the alarm. There he is, standing in the tide pools on the edge of the island. He can see freedom, and he knows they've just begun the search. What would you do at this point if you were John? What would you do? Hide. Someone suggested hide. Any others? Swim. I think I heard that. Just jump in the bay and swim. Anybody want to give up? Let's make that our 3 choices, okay? You're going to hide, you're going to swim, you're going to give up. John did none of those things, because all those things would mean changing your plan. At the point he should have developed a new plan, he continued with the original plan. Original plan, he was not a good swimmer. He was very concerned about drowning. When he left the kitchen, amongst the supplies he had taken with him, and I hope I remember one tonight, I did, good, were about 3 dozen rubber gloves. Now, they're not exactly like my medical glove, but picture a big yellow rubber glove. Gloves they issued to the guys washing dishes. He had boxes of gloves in the supply room. What good are gloves? They'll hold air. So there's John in the tide pools blowing up balloons. What good are balloons? Well, he takes off his shirt. He buttons the shirt back up. He ties the long sleeve shut in knots, and then he begins to fill his shirt full of balloons. He's building a set of water wings, a flotation device. It took him time to do this, time during which they're searching. They still haven't found him. Finally, armed with a flotation device clutched to his chest, he finally jumps in the bay and starts to kick for San Francisco. Imagine the shock he felt. The bay was about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty cold water. Now, he's motivated. I imagine his heart is pumping, he's full of adrenaline. But a few hundred yards off the island, John would later say, he started to weaken. Cold is sapping his strength. His hands and feet are going numb. He's getting less blood flow to his limbs because his body's responding to the cold. Got to keep the torso warm, to keep the heart and lungs warm and pumping. After a short time trying to make it off the island, John would later say he concentrated on just hanging on to that churn full of balloons. Don't drown. And even though he stopped heading towards San Francisco, he wasn't still in the water. He was moving. He was picking up speed. The wrong direction. If there's anything worse than the cold water in the bay, it's the strength of the current and the tides. San Francisco Bay is a tidal estuary. Twice a day the ocean floods this bay, That's high tide, flood tide. After a period of stable water between the tides, the bay begins to ebb or drop. The difference between high and low tide that night was quite severe. John, unbeknownst to him, got to the base of the cliff at the very end of high tide. And then he wastes all the stable water time blowing up balloons. When he enters the bay, it's ebbing. The difference that night between high and low was just over 5 feet. That's a significant change in tide. Millions and millions of gallons of water are rushing west under the Golden Gate Bridge, taking John with it. The current that night reached just over 6 knots. That's faster than anybody can swim. John noticed the direction he was headed, realized what he was faced with, and decided to fight his body's response to the cold. He's kicking and pushing south again as the bay is moving west. I imagine him aiming for Pier 39. Then I imagine a few minutes later he realizes he's now aiming for Pier 45. He's moved about 1/8 of a mile. Then he's looking at Fort Mason. Then he's looking at Marina Green. Then he sees the St. Francis Yacht Club. And then he sees the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge come out of the fog. And with that as motivation, John makes one desperate push for shore, and he does it. John Paul Scott swims to San Francisco. Don't let anyone ever tell you an Alcatraz convict never swam to shore. At least one did that we know of, John Paul Scott. There's John hanging onto the rocks underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. Traffic is roaring above him. The waves are battering him. He's that close. How far would he get from that point? How long would John be free? I'll tell you the end of the story at our last stop. Just down. John Paul Scott, he's on the rocks under the Golden Gate Bridge. Any of you guys here tonight been near that spot? Yes, it's beautiful, right? You can see the bridge from underneath. I love that spot. You know, all that land on the southern part of the Golden Gate Bridge is part of the same national park we're all standing in. That land is also part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. But it goes by a different name. It goes by the name that the Spanish gave it when they built a fort there, a presidio. And then when the United States took over that fortification, they liked the name. They built their own fort. They called it the Presidio. And the U.S. Army maintained the Presidio as a military base to the year 1994. John Paul Scott has made landfall in the middle of an Army base. Waiting for him is the U.S. Army. Notified there's a man missing from Alcatraz, as routine, they search the waterline, and for the first time ever, they see an Alcatraz convict on the waterline. They drag him off the rocks, they cuff him up, put him on a boat, bring him right back to Alcatraz. John lost consciousness in the boat ride back. Hypothermia is a serious danger. Cold water can kill. His body core temperature crashed. When they rushed him here, got him to the dock, they brought him right to the hospital. He spent 3 days in the hospital being treated by the Public Health Service. At the end of those 3 days, the doctor picked up the phone, called the warden, says, "My patient's well, what shall we do?" What would you do? The warden sent up 4 of his biggest, strongest officers. They bodily picked up John Paul Scott out of the hospital bed, and they carried him to the dark cell in D block. He remained in the dark cell till the prison shut 3 months later. John was one of the last guys to leave, but he was actually the very last Alcatraz convict to leave San Francisco because he still had to be put on trial. His trial occurred that summer, July 1963. John Paul Scott's charge, escape. He's not only the last man to attempt to escape this prison, he's the only one ever charged with the crime of escape. All the other men who attempted, those men pulled out of the bay, that's a fair number. Those men caught high and dry on the island, that's most of them. Those men were charged with attempting to escape. The fact that John's not arrested, till he's in San Francisco, means completed escape. Found guilty of that crime, he spent the rest of his life behind bars. I hope all your plans go better than John Paul Scott's. Thank you much for coming out here to help us support this national park. Thank you for listening.
So we're leaving now. That was really, really cool. One of the best tours I've ever actually been on. It was really interesting. The audio tour was good because they had all the sound effects and it sounded like you were there. Definitely recommend going. I definitely recommend going to Alcatraz if you're in the area. If you're in San Francisco or the area just once and you can only do one thing, I recommend Alcatraz. And it felt like you were actually there. And it was just really cool stories and everything. Definitely recommend it. I made this video, I made this a 2-part video just because it was so long, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you give the video a big thumbs up, subscribe for more videos, and I will see you in the next vlog. This is the life of Mikey.